I often think of my sites as living, breathing things since they can change so much over the course of a day. As you work on a site, you're constantly creating new files and folders, renaming files and moving files around within your directory structure. In Dreamweaver, we use the Files panel to make the majority of these changes. Using the Files panel, I can create new files and folders, rename files, move files and folders, copy and paste files, you name it. Not only is using the Files panel the most efficient way to make these changes within your site, it's also the safest way. Websites, by their very nature, rely on understanding where other files are. When you place an image on a page or a link to another file, Dreamweaver places code on your page that tells the browser where it can find that particular file or where it can find that particular image. If you move a file and it doesn't update the link on any pages that reference it, your link no longer works. Or in the case of an image, the image no longer displays. And that's especially problematic for larger sites, where dozens of pages might link to a single page. Making all those changes manually would take considerable time. But if you remember to use the Files panel to make these changes, Dreamweaver will automatically update all links on that page, as well as any pages in your site that link to that page. Let's take a closer look using the Files panel. So the first thing I'm going to do with the Files panel, move right over here, and you can see it's showing my Groundswell site. So I'm just going to create a new file. Now I can do that by going up to the root directory and simply right-clicking. And of course on a Mac, you'd want to control-click. And notice that right here, I can choose to create a new file or new folder. I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. I have a new file at the very bottom of my Files panel now called untitled.html. I'm just going to go ahead and call it test.html. For those of you on a PC, when you're creating a new file through the dialog box and saving it, Dreamweaver will go ahead and place the extension on it for you. That does not happen in the Files panel, so always remember to put the extension on there. If I double-click this new page, I can see that it is totally empty. So it's just a brand new page, nothing on it, nothing within the code other than what our preferences are set up for. So I can go ahead and close that. In addition to creating files, you can also edit them from here as well. Again, if we go back to our test.html and we right-click or control-click that, I can go to Edit, and I can delete it. And it's going to prompt you because you can't really undo that. And as soon as you delete it, now that file is gone. You can create new files as well as get rid of new files directly from the Files panel. What about renaming files? Sometimes in a lot of programs, you'd have to open something up and then do a save as to rename it. But with the Files panel, we don't really have to do that. I'm going to expand my Files panel. I can move it right here and just drag this out a little bit. And that's going to allow me to increase the size of the naming so that I can see what's going on here. So all of the pages that are referencing boards have an underscore, but Boards Crunch has that uppercase C. We know with our file naming conventions, that's really not a good idea. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this once and then click on it again to activate the name. Now, if you double click really fast, it's going to open it up. So be careful about that. I'm going to highlight that and do underscore C. So now it says boards underscore crunch. Here's where we might run into a problem because all the other pages are linking to a file that has boards crunch as one word. And now the file name is going to change. So let's take a look at what Dreamweaver is going to do about that. I'm going to hit enter. And Dreamweaver automatically says, hey, these files were linking to that file and they were using the old name. Do you want me to update them or not update them? There's no real good reason here not to update them. So I'm going to say update. And now all those pages, and let's go ahead and open one. So if I open up the boards swells page and I go up and find the link for the crunch, which is right here, I can see that now it's linking to the page name that I just created. So if you look down the property inspector, you can click on this image and you'll see that it's linking to boards underscore crunch.html. That is awesome. Now I'm going to close this file because file management can go way beyond this. If I go up to my site and I look at all my folders, I can see that I do have a subdirectory called lifestyle, and it's got all of the pages that are in the lifestyle section. Well, my gear section's got a lot of pages too, but they're all sitting in the root. They really ought to be in a subdirectory so that I can keep my site a little bit more organized. So what I'm going to do is go right back up to the root directory, right click, choose new folder, and I'll just call this new folder gear. Right now it's empty, but we're going to put some pages in it. So I'm going to highlight the board comparison page, and using my control key or the command key on the Mac, I'm going to select some non-contiguous files here. So I'm going to select boards crunch, swells, velvet, and comparison. And we might as well go ahead and select board 2 because the gear page is the only one that's not selected there. So all the board pages, go ahead and select all of those guys. The gear folder is empty, but we can simply drag and drop into the gear folder to move all of those files into that subdirectory. We get a much longer listing. And it says, okay, everybody that was pointing to one of those files also needs to be updated because, again, we're moving the location within the directory structure. So be sure to always choose update, and we're going to go ahead and update that. Perfect. As you can see, the Files panel can save you a tremendous amount of time when managing files and folders, as well as save you from making costly errors. Of course, that's not all the Files panel can do. Later in this title, we'll discuss using the Files panel to upload and download your remote files, as well as helping you work in a collaborative environment. For now, however, concentrate on making sure you practice discipline when needing to make changes on your site. Make these changes from within Dreamweaver using the Files panel instead of using your operating system, and you'll be confident of making these changes correctly and without any costly errors. Once you have a new site designed, you'll occasionally need to add information to the site or edit the existing information. And it's also not uncommon to have your Files panel crowded with older sites that are no longer current projects. To deal with these types of situations, you'll need to understand a little about site management in Dreamweaver. Managing your sites in Dreamweaver is extremely easy, as Dreamweaver puts the information right at your fingertips. We'll examine a few ways to access the Site Management dialog box, take a look at its capabilities, and then talk about editing our sites. So how do we access our Site Management dialog box? Well, there's a couple of different ways that we can do this. I can go up to the menu and I can choose Site, Manage Sites. I could go over to my quick access icon and go to Manage Sites from here. And I could go over to my Files panel, grab the pull down menu that lists all my available sites, and right at the bottom of that, choose Manage Sites from there. It doesn't really matter which one I choose. I'm going to get the exact same dialog box. Now that we have the Manage Sites dialog box up, let's take a look at what some of this stuff will do for us. First, if I just wanted to create a new site, there's a New button right there. I also have an Edit button, so I could choose one of these sites and then click Edit and edit some of those existing settings. Now, we'll talk about that in just a moment. I also have a duplicate site. Now, why in the world would I want to do that? Well, let's say that one site was going to upload files to a quality assurance server, and then after your site had passed the QA testing, you needed to upload it to a remote server. Well, Dreamweaver can't have multiple remote declarations in a site. So you could create one that uploads to the QA server, duplicate it, and then change the remote to the live server on that one. So you can see here, we have one called Groundswell Remote. So maybe the Groundswell site is uploading to a QA server and the remote would be uploading to the live website. So that's a really easy thing to do. I can also export or import files. I can also export and import site definitions, and this is really interesting. So I could select Groundswell and I could choose export, and then it would export that out as an STE or a site definition file. If I was moving to a different computer or if somebody else was going to work on this in a collaborative environment, this is a nice way of going ahead and exporting out all those settings so that you don't have to enter in all that information again. The downside to this is that if you're going to give this to a coworker, remember that this site definition is pointing to a specific root directory. If they don't have that folder in exactly the same spot on their local drive, then it's pointing to the wrong place and it won't be as effective. You'll notice that we have one option that I haven't talked about, which is remove. Let's say you have an old site that you're not going to use anymore. You can go ahead and highlight it and choose remove, and it's going to delete that from your site definitions. Note that it told me that it could not undo that action, so that's not something you want to do lightly. You want to be absolutely certain that that is exactly what you wanted to do. All right, I'm going to go ahead and click Done. I mentioned editing sites, so I'm going to grab my pull-down menu and choose Groundswell. Well, we know that if we bring up the Manage Sites dialog box, Edit is an option right there, but there's a much faster way to edit sites. Right now, the Groundswell site is my current site. If I go over to the Files panel and I double-click Groundswell, up comes my site definition dialog box for that. So to me, that's a much faster way of accessing that. So here I notice that my Groundswell site does not have a default images folder specified. The default images folder is really nice because if that's specified, if Dreamweaver ever has to create images like spacer GIF files or something like that, it knows where to put them. So I'm going to click on Browse. It'll take me right into my root directory. I can find my images folder, select it, click OK. It'll make the change to the site, and now that's registered as being the default images directory, which is nice. Chances are you won't need to do a lot of work managing your sites, but knowing that Dreamweaver makes any changes you need to make to your site definitions quick and easy allows you not to worry about updating your site and concentrate instead on creating your content. One of the things that you realize early on in working with websites is that your code is always at the mercy of the user's browsers. It's a crowded browser market today with Internet Explorer, Firefox, Safari, Opera, and Google's Chrome browser being only a few of the browsers that your page might encounter. As such, it's always a smart idea to test your page in as many browsers as you can when you're developing your site. This can prevent rendering errors from one browser to the next and help you ensure a consistent experience for all visitors to your site. Dreamweaver also allows you to set up multiple browsers for testing and gives you an internal testing environment using Live View. So here we have our photos.htm page open from our lifestyle subdirectory. And I want to go ahead and check out Live View before we move on to testing in browsers. I'm going to go over to my panels and I'm going to collapse this down to icons so that I've got a little bit more screen real estate here. And I'm going to go up to my document toolbar and turn Live View on. Now, Live View uses the WebKit rendering engine. So that's the same engine that Safari and Chrome uses. So previewing here gives you a good idea as to what it might look like in those browsers. The thing I love about Live View, of course, is that all the interactivity is built into it. So you can check out all of your JavaScripting and things like that, including CSS-based rollovers here in Live View without having to preview in the browser. So I'm going to go ahead and turn Live View off. Now, if I did want to preview this in the browser, I can stay right on the document toolbar, grab this little icon where the planet is, and preview in any browser that I have set up. In this case, I could preview it in Firefox. And I could check the functionality in Firefox to make sure that it was still doing what I expected to do, which it is. You may have noticed that previewing it in Firefox has a function key beside it. So I could hit F12 and automatically preview it without having to come to the menu, which is really nice. But how do you set things like that up? And how do you set up multiple browsers? Maybe I've got another browser that I want to use. How do I set that up? Well, we do that by using Dreamweaver's preferences. So again, on the PC, we're going to go to Edit, Preferences, and on the Mac, you guys would go to Dreamweaver Preferences. In this long list of categories on the left-hand side, I'm going to go to Preview in Browser. So here I can see that Firefox and Internet Explorer are the only two that are currently set up. Well, I'm going to add Google's Chrome browser. If you've got multiple browsers installed on your hard drive, you can choose any one you want, like Opera or Safari or whatever you'd like that you don't see listed here. Feel free to go out and download some of those browsers. They all are free. And as I've mentioned before, testing in as many browsers as you can is a really good idea. So I'm going to click plus, and now I've got to go find Google's Chrome browser. So I'm going to hit browse, and it's not always in the easiest place to find either. And I'm going to go up, and I'm going to keep going up until I'm on my local disk, and I'm going to find users, and there I am. And I'm going to go on my application data. If you don't see this in Windows, you might actually make sure in your file view options that hidden files are turned on. So I'm going to go to App Data, Local, Google, Chrome, Application. So you have to keep going until we find it, and we choose Chrome. Now, at the time of this recording, there was no Chrome browser for the Mac, but I'm sure one's coming. So if you are on the Mac and you've downloaded a version of Chrome browser, you'll probably find that in your Applications folder. So I'm going to find Chrome, click Open, and why don't I just go ahead and make that my secondary browser? So I'm going to go ahead and click OK here. And notice that that one now has a hotkey of Control F12, and on the Mac, your secondary browser will be Command F12. So I'm going to click OK. Now that that secondary browser is set up, I can just hit Control F12, and that's going to launch that in Google's Chrome browser. And again, I can test functionality here, and it's working out as fine as well. Now, in every browser I've tested so far, in the WebKit rendering engine, in Chrome, and in Firefox, my page is looking and acting exactly the same, which gives me a lot of peace of mind about how users are going to experience my site. Previewing your pages as you're working on them will help you prevent small errors from becoming bigger errors later on and help ensure a consistent experience for all of your users. Before working on any website for the first time, you should define a site in Dreamweaver that will allow you to control all aspects of working with that site. Dreamweaver is designed to build websites, not just web pages. Site management is tied into everything that Dreamweaver does. Without defining a site, Dreamweaver can't resolve links, check related files, or help you manage your assets. Although there are a lot of options when defining your sites, you can make it relatively pain-free. Now, the first thing I want to show you is how many different places in Dreamweaver you can actually define a new site. If you go over to the Files panel, for example, you can click on Manage Sites, and it'll show you any of your active sites. If you don't have any, or even if you just want to create a new one from here, notice we have a button that says New, and you could go ahead and choose that. If I go up to the menu, I have Site, and here's New Site right from there. And if I go over to the Application toolbar, I notice that in my quick access icons, I can click on Site, and I can choose New Site from there as well. Another location is in our welcome screen. So if we don't have a file currently open and our welcome screen is visible, notice that I can go down and create new and click on Dreamweaver Site. So it doesn't really matter where you do this from. You'll always get the same dialog box. So I'm going to click New Dreamweaver Site, and up comes my site definition dialog box. Now this comes in 2 tabs. We have Basic and Advanced. Both of these give you pretty much the same options. Advanced does have some options that Basic doesn't have. Basic is more of a wizard-like approach. So it's just going to ask you some questions and sort of walk you through the process. So here it says, what would you like to name your site? Well, I'm going to go ahead and name my site Groundswell. Now, after that, it says, well, what's the HTTP address of your site? Well, I don't know that. Well, a lot of what you're doing when you define a site is optional. Now, let's take a look at some of our other options, and let's switch from the Basic tab to the Advanced tab. Even though I was already entering up some information, you'll notice that by clicking on the Advanced tab, it went ahead and filled that in for me. So it just says Groundswell right there. Now, the first thing that Dreamweaver wants to know in the Advanced section after you name your site is where the local root folder is. So if you remember, the root folder is the folder that contains your website somewhere on your hard drive, or if you're working in a shared environment, it might even be on a server. So I'm going to click the Browse icon just beside local root folder, and I'm going to browse out to my desktop. And here I can find the Chapter 3 folder that I've copied over to the desktop. So that was copied from my exercise files. I'm going to double click to select that. On the Mac, you'll highlight that folder and you'll hit the Choose button. On the PC, open the folder up and then choose Select. Okay, now, from here on, everything else is optional. Default images folder, optional. Whether I want to make links relative to document or site root, the default is document, I'm going to leave it that way. HTTP address, I don't know, so I'm not going to enter it. Caching, I'm going to make sure caching is enabled. Now what that does for you is it'll run through all the files that are already in that folder. So if it's a totally empty folder, this won't matter. But if your folder already has some files in it like ours does, it'll cache them up and make everything available for use right now. Believe it or not, that's it. All those other categories on the left-hand side, like remote info, where you're choosing exactly how you're going to access your remote site and upload those files. Testing server, in case you're using like Cold Fusion or ASP and you want to specify a testing server so it can test those pages. All those things, they're optional. And since we don't have that information right now, we're not going to put anything. We're just going to leave them alone. Sticking with the local info, I've named my site Groundswell, and I've chosen where my local root folder is on my hard drive. That is really all I have to do. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Dreamweaver is going to take a moment to cache everything up for me. And then over in the Files panel now, I can see here's my Groundswell site, and I have access to all those files and folders. As you can see, defining a site in Dreamweaver is an easy but necessary step required for the start of any new project. You can give Dreamweaver all the site information at the very beginning of the project, or as we've done here, you can wait and define things like remote information at a later date. That's certainly helpful if you don't have those settings when you're first starting out.